G'day guys, and welcome to the final episode of our massive Ford Falcon build. Look, I'm terribly sorry that this episode is so late. We've been so busy, there's so much that's been happening here, but this episode is about catching up on the series, so let's get on with it. So in the last episode, we completed the final stage of our build. That was when we pulled the engine out, really got down and dirty with it, had everything apart. We slapped it all back together. We put it on the dyno. It made awesome power. I'm super excited about it. And then it was time to take it down the drag strip and see what the thing actually does. So we're here at Sydney International Dragway. We've just done our first full quarter-mile pass in the Falcon. It ran 130 mile an hour, so straight out of the blocks, not terrible. I kind of just drove it out because I'm a bit nervous about the auto trans and just probably don't really know too much about it. Most of that time it ran an 11.7, but it had a 2.18 60 foot. So tonight, that's probably what we'll be focusing on. I'll probably try and get it to drive. I'd like to drive out a little bit harder. So I'll just stall it up on the foot brake and then give it hell. Whatever that did, that's what this thing runs. That was hard off the foot brake, so we went pretty well there. Felt like it took off pretty good. It did chatter a bit in the back. Pretty massive burnout, so I'm fairly proud of that. I think that'll look pretty good. I think we had top of second, and then when it clicked into third on the tyre, it kind of slowed down a bit. But old Falcon has certainly been reliable, can't argue with that. So if this is 130 mile an hour pass as well, that's 3 or 4 130 mile an hour passes in probably under an hour without opening the hood. Things are good in the Falcon.
How good is this? Mid 11 seconds, 130 miles an hour, and he won a race!
Mate, killing it.
That's awesome.
Oh, man. Awesome night out.
Are you happy?
Yeah, stoked. Awesome night out. Got 2 out of 3 wins.
Yep.
Not embarrassed to be here in this car, so that's pretty cool.
Didn't break the car.
Didn't break the car.
Didn't break the car.
We ran a 11.65, 131. We ran a 11.7, 130, and a 11.75, 130.
Bracket
so
racing.
It's super consistent for a car that weighs, what on the weighbridge, it was
19 something, yeah.
So 1900 kilograms.
Yeah.
It's heavy. What's going on though? Our 60-foot time. 2.18 60 foot, 2.18 60 foot, 2.16 60 foot time.
Right.
So what this is telling me is that I've launched it just off the throttle with very little brake. I've launched it hard on the brake, full throttle, and we've had tyre pressures down, tyre pressures up, tyre pressures around. It's telling me that these tyres are off, these tyres are dead.
Right.
So that means it has kept the gearbox alive, it's kept everything happy. It's the time, if we can get our 60 foot under 2 seconds, which is it just has to happen, that's just easy. Mate, she's a contender for a quick car.
Got a 10?
I think there's a 10 in this car.
Yeah, man.
Mate, but in saying that, as soon as we take it away from the drag strip and just drive it on the road, on the roll-on, mate, this is a quick car.
Well, speaking of driving on the road, we've done the drag race.
Yep.
Okay. We haven't embarrassed ourselves. I reckon that's a tick.
Yep.
One of your list.
Absolutely, yeah, stoked.
Now, we better go and get a good night's rest. Go for a road trip.
All right. Well, it's still alive, so road trip it is.
All right.
All right. Awesome. Legend. Richo's massive plan was that we were going to drive this thing from the middle of Sydney, do a whole bunch of sightseeing. Then we were going to drive to his dad's farm in Bathurst, use a bit of cruise control, do a bit of fuel economy stuff, then rip massive helis on the farm, then drive it home, just to kind of show that it's truly, really streetable still. But Standard Richard organised that on Bathurst race weekend. Yeah, so the busiest event in motor racing Australian history, yeah, he organised it on that weekend. So it didn't happen. That was all right. A week after that, I actually went and got my eyes done so I don't have to wear my glasses anymore. So I got a message from Richard saying, "Hey mate, me and Mitch are taking your Falcon to drag challenge. Hope that's cool." Well, yeah, that's all right, but it clearly wasn't going to last on the factory gearbox. So I kind of threw the ball to Richard to say, "Mate, it's yours if you get a gearbox in it." So we missed a whole bunch of filming of getting the gearbox into the car, but Rob from Monster Talk came to the rescue, supplied us with a Stage 3 built ZF gearbox to slap into this thing, and amazing. So it's got the billet input shaft, all of the parts have all been cryogenically heat treated, it's got all the clutches, it's got all the factory ZF filters and all of the fancy mods. Mate, unbreakable now. So, you know what? He actually did a good thing, got the gearbox in, Mitch put the Ks on it to run it in, and then they just went to drag challenge.
Similar in format to the American Drag Week, Street Machine's Drag Challenge is a vehicular and human endurance test which sees Australia's toughest street cars commute thousands of kilometres over 5 days and 3 racetracks in order to lay down their best quarter-mile times each day.
Hello everybody, I'm Scott. I'm very tall. I don't like having a pineapple pizza. Can't even reach the pedals.
The guys were off to a great start with Mitch laying down a respectable low 11 on the first pass at Calder Park. All that was needed after that was to refuel with some pumped 98 octane petrol so they could make it the 300 odd kilometres in the quiet, leather-clad, luxury air conditioning to the first mandatory stop at Swan Hill Dragway and then driving on to Mildura. Day 2 was a long day for the guys. After several hundred kilometres driving through dusty wheat fields, Mitch and Richo arrived at Mildura's 8th mile Sunset Strip with one goal: get the boost up on the start line, and get the 60-foot times down.
Two days of racing at Mildura. One turned into quite a long day for us.
It did.
So, what happened to the tail shaft?
Look, me in my infinite wisdom, I thought it would be a good idea, seeing as though the next 3 days of racing we're going to be at short 8-mile tracks, that I should maybe try and give the launch tune up a little bit of an improvement. And yeah, I was just on the foot brake in the pits, and we got a couple of PSI more boost in it than we'd had before, and well, you've probably seen the carnage that unraveled after that, or raveled in the case of the tail shaft. Yeah, so basically did a tail shaft in the pits before we'd even started racing. So yeah.
So what sort of stuff were you doing in the ECU, or is it like a trade secret?
Yeah, look, I can't tell you too much. No, so just a little bit of boost control tuning. So we do have boost control set over a race timer in this car. So yeah, basically setting up the launch boost number just a little bit higher, and I wanted to test to see where I could get it to. We've been leaving on 5 or 6 pounds of boost so far, and yeah, just thought I'd try and pop a couple more in it, and it seems that there was a couple more too much.
More than the tail shaft wanted to see.
I think so, yeah.
Okay. However, we did manage to get a tail shaft, which was amazing. There was they're not very common G6E, or I suppose turbo ZF Falcon FG style tail shafts. There were plenty of the NA ones around, but nothing that we could find in a turbo version, which meant that we had to find a man who owned one and physically take it from him.
Pry it from his hands.
Yes, no, fella named Josh, local guy, wonderful dude, came to the rescue and said, take mine, get back on the road. So you're a champion, Josh. Thank you very much. We owe you many beers. It's raining. Raining on drag challenge. That new dash, does it tell you how much rain we've got?
No, it does not have a wet sensor.
Wet sensor?
No.
Yeah. Ham and pineapple pizza, Scotty.
Between dodging short bouts of rain and helping Haltech customers perfect their tunes, Mitch managed to get one pass in. 7:22 at 1:07 in the 8th mile track at South Coast Raceway in Portland. Almost exactly the same as his best 8th mile time in Mildura the day before. Then it was time to hit the road for the 4-hour drive back to Melbourne.
Almost finished day 4. We're stuck in just a bit of suburban Melbourne traffic currently. The OGSIXE is handling it quite well. What's the temp say on
Yeah, all good. Yeah, normal coolant, oil pressure, all that sort of fun stuff. The dash has been keeping us very well informed with all of the channels coming from the ECU, which is pretty cool.
Very good. And of course we did one pass at Portland, so we drove 500 kilometers to Portland for 7.2 seconds of drag racing.
In between bouts of rain and sunshine and wind and all that fun stuff.
And helping people out with their Haltech ECUs and things like that.
Yeah.
So, and then we did that. So what's that? 7.22 at 107.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty much almost exactly the same as the as your Wednesday time.
Yeah.
At Mildura.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, consistent. And now we're almost back in Melbourne after another several hundred kilometres, ready for the last day at Calder Park, where we have a plan.
Scott doesn't know about the plan.
Scott doesn't know about the plan. Okay, so we broke the tail shaft a couple of days ago. We have a stock tail shaft in it now, thanks to Josh, who took the one out of his car. And that got us back here to Calder. We're on day 5, the last day. We really want to send it, so the good guys at Max Performance have come to the party and dropped off a new tail shaft, which we're going to put in and then turn the boost up.
With new oil in the diff and a new tail shaft reconnecting it to the gearbox, it was time to wind up the boost and hit the track. Well, that strategy didn't work. The big girl kept turning the tyres on the dig, making for slow 60s, and as the intake temps rose throughout the day, the mile an hour dropped. Every time slip was worse than the last, and it wasn't looking good. The boys took some time out to let the engine cool down and rethink some strategies. Once the sun was down and the air was cool, things started to turn around. Mitch got the launch bang on and managed a 1.6 in the 60, but the car double shifted into third, which meant a 10.64 at 135 mile an hour pass. A PB for OGSIXE, but certainly not the limit of its potential.
Well, to be honest, Mitch and Richo did me a big favour. They took the thing to drag challenge, they towed a trailer. That was something that I kind of wanted to do just to sort of show that the thing was, you know, fully streetable. They did huge kilometres in it. Perfect, the thing goes forever. After the ZF box went in it, Mitch was able to adjust the tune-up and make the thing launch harder. So basically, I was sort of receiving the messages from the ZF gearbox with the torque reduction strategy from the factory gearbox computer saying, please don't put that much torque into me in the lower gears. As a result, the car was doing its 60 foot times in about 2.2 seconds. Even though the car weighs 1,950 kilograms, a 2.2 60 is still pretty embarrassing. So Mitch was able to move all of that torque reduction stuff. First couple of passes, he had it to a 1.7, 1.8, 60 foot, which, while it's still not amazing, for a super heavy car that's doing thousands of kilometers, it's not terrible. And he did manage to reel off a 10.60, 135 mile an hour. Now, after the drag challenge event, this thing's done towing, it's done drag racing, it's done circuit racing, it's done Motorcana, it's done Dyno Queen events. It's even been a show car at one of the latest Mighty Car Mods adventures. Now, all those things are amazing, but when I built this thing, the most important part to me is it's still a daily driver. I don't want to have a daily and a race car. It needs to still be able to daily, nice and easy, so I want to make sure it still commutes perfectly well. It's just another afternoon driving home from work in the mighty Barra powered FG Falcon. Not many cars on the road run a genuine 10-second pass and more than 130 mile an hour and can get driven every single day this quietly and calmly. It's absolutely remarkable. The gearbox shifts just beautifully. It's an absolute credit to Robert Monster Talk who built this gearbox, that it drives as well as it does. You'd have no idea of the potential of this car if you just jumped in and started driving. So much so actually that when the keys are left at work, we have to put a little note on the dash just to remind if anyone decides to take it out for lunch or do whatever. No problems at all, but just have to be aware that this thing does make more than 500 kilowatts. It's pretty crazy to think that you can sit in traffic, the thing idles at 550 RPM, you put it in D for drive and off you go. You'll be none the wiser until you put your foot down. Feel a bit lonely in here today without either Richard sitting there or Mitch chatting about all the drag week stuff, but Mitch is busy at work with all of our next generation ECU and dash stuff. Richard's at PRI at the moment, so standard Richard, so he's over there. He was polishing up all of his hilarious jokes before he left. Now he's in America telling hilarious jokes. One thing this car has done to me, which is a bit of an issue, is it's made me fall in love with the automatic transmission. After this, I don't think in this sort of Sydney traffic, I don't think I'm going to be able to go back to a manual car with a clutch pedal. I think the amount of times you need to press that clutch in Sydney traffic, I think I'd be hard pressed to get back in an everyday manual car. So I guess you could say that that's a downside, I suppose, of owning an auto Falcon. You know what, it's been so long since this series has started that I completely forgot about our circuit racing adventure. And Richard and I went out to the track, and that was with our intercooler and exhaust mods, like the basic mods. I think it was making about 320 kilowatts at the wheels, somewhere like that, and that was amazing fun. So we went to London Raceway and did a whole bunch of laps, did a whole bunch of burnouts, did some helis, tried a bit of drifting, not that good at it. That was pretty awesome though. That was a really good day. So the whole adventure of building this car, we've met a heap of great people. It's been really funny to go to the tracks and sort of show everyone what we're doing with this standard car.
Well, as you can tell from that, you can't often use 500 kilowatts in Sydney traffic. But the beauty of this car is it still makes 50 kilowatts just as well as it did when it was dead factory. And that's super good on the cruise to work. Before we go on, I want to say thanks so much to everybody for putting so much effort and attention into the Falcon build series. I really appreciate it. Heaps of guys have been asking a lot of questions, and I want to address a bunch of those because I agree with so many of the questions, and they're things that I really want to answer so that you guys can make your Falcon or whatever project you build to get a bit of an understanding of why I've done some things the way that I have. I'll start with the first question, and that is, why didn't you install a new transcooler with a fan and exchanger? Well, it's a really good question, and the answer is because when I started building this, I didn't actually know that the factory cooler had a problem. So for those of you that don't know, these things have got a factory auto trans cooler. So the red automatic transmission fluid goes through this cooler, and then it's also got green engine coolant that goes through this cooler. So it's basically a water to oil exchanger that's bolted on the side of the engine. These things do have problems. They split internally, and before you know it, you've got a milkshake in your gearbox and your ZF's gone. Had I have known that, it probably would have been one of the first mods that I did. Didn't know about it, and I've just been blissfully unaware. The thing's been making 500 kilowatts with the factory cooler assembly there, but now that I've actually discovered that this is a real problem, it will be getting changed out for a proper cooler. The second question was around the ZF automatic transmission, and it was, what sort of power do I think the ZF box can handle? I don't have a ton of experience with them, but in this particular car, it came off the dyno making around 320 or 330 kilowatts and did 2 full days of circuit racing, plenty of launches,
Didn't miss a beat. When it went to 500 kilowatts, that's where I started to get a little bit nervous, and I kind of knew that I needed to be very careful with the torque management coming out of the factory transmission control module, and I had to listen to it and dumb the car right down in its drag racing 60-foot times. And quite a lot of people gave me hints and tips to say, whatever I do, don't go full throttle and let it kick down from, say, third to second or second to first, because the input shaft would meet its maker 100%. So in my experience, mine was fine at 320, 350 kilowatts at the wheels. Any more than that, I think you're really rolling the dice. The next question's about the XR6 Sprint model in particular, and it's with the XR Sprint technically, how did the factory restrict power in the lower gears? It seems like you could go harder off the line. Can you play with this? Yeah, pretty similar answer to the last question, where the factory TCM, transmission control module, sends torque reduction requests back to the engine management system. So that'll say, okay, in first gear, don't open the throttle the whole way, or retard the ignition timing a whole lot, or pull a whole bunch of boost out of the engine. And what it's doing there is reducing the engine power in the lower gears, where there's a huge amount of torque getting transmitted through first and second gear. So by reducing the torque that the engine's making, you've got a better chance of the transmission living. So all well and good, it does slow the car down. So as sort of keen as you want to get, you can start ignoring more and more and more of those torque reduction requests. The car will go faster and faster and faster until the gearbox says that it's not happy anymore. You'll know it's not happy when you press the throttle and it feels like it's in neutral. It's not, it's just got a broken input shaft. Our next question, would I get similar results with the same bolt-on mods on a BF Falcon, which has a bigger turbo than the stock FG? So, all right, the thing to remember here is that BF and FG, after about 2006, all a very similar engine combination. So camshafts, cylinder heads, all that stuff. The earlier models had the weaker conrods. After 06, 2006, started having the bigger, beefier conrods. But the main power limiting factor between a BF and a FG is the turbocharger itself. That's it. They were different. So the BF had a 3582, whereas the FG had a GT 3576, a slightly smaller turbo that comes on a bit earlier, but the FG factory turbo is limited to about 320 kilowatts at the wheels. The BF series turbo is limited to about, say, 350 kilowatts at the wheels. So yes, if you were using the earlier series turbo with the basic bolt-on mods, you would end up making more power if you were using the factory turbo. Next question, and a question I keep asking myself, to be completely honest. While we had the engine out, why not go full send and upgrade all the internals? I don't really have a good answer, to be completely honest. Time, money, stupidity. The engine was out on the ground. Like, the thing was fully in pieces, and I left stock rods and stock pistons in it because I didn't think the project would probably go I didn't think it would be as successful as it was, is probably the answer. I was kind of thinking it'll make 450 kilowatts and it'll go forever, and that's awesome. One of the first pulls on the dyno with the new combo, I wanted it made over 450 kilowatts, and it was that time that I was asking myself, why didn't I go full send? There's no good answer. Probably should have, and in hindsight, I probably would have. Next question is a personal one. How much did all the parts cost? Well, I told my wife that it cost about $1,500, and I reckon that's probably about right. But if you wanted to know more about it, you can definitely jump on the build page for this car and have a bit of a look through the list of all of the parts. Look, it is expensive doing anything like this, but compared to the price of the car, I definitely don't think it's unreasonable for the power level that it's got and how reliable it's been. So there's a huge list of all of the bits. You can go and have a look through, see what everything's worth, and then support the guys that have supported us by hopefully buying a few bits off them. So once you've collected all the parts, just keep in mind that one of the most expensive parts of any car build is the labour.
This stuff doesn't happen overnight. It does take a huge amount of time, and there's a huge amount of responsibility to put everything together and make sure that it's right. Doing it incorrectly is just going to end up breaking parts and costing you more money in the long run. Look, I was super lucky that I could call on Benny to come in and give us a hand to pull the engine out and do all of that stuff. In saying that, I am going to be in debt to him forever, so I think it's best that you find the right mechanic to do the right job on your car. The next question is one that I was also really keen on. What's the fuel economy on this beast after all the mods? Well, I was a little bit nervous, but knowing how it all works and knowing that we left the cylinder head dead standard, it shouldn't have changed that much. And what a shock, it didn't. So this thing does about 440 kilometres from about 60 litres of fuel. So that's been the same when the car was dead standard or when it's making 500 kilowatts of the wheels. And that ends up at about 15.5 litres per 100 kilometres, which in this day and age, it's definitely not amazing, but when we remember that the car weighs 1,950 kilograms, you start to think, you know what, actually, that's not too bad. So regardless whether it was factory or whether it was heavily modified, because we haven't changed anything to do with the cylinder head, 15.5 litres per 100, when it's on E85, it runs about 20 to 21 litres per 100. So definitely not terrible, but you are at the Bowser a fair bit, but that's Falcon life. All right, and we're on to the last question. While your final dyno numbers are impressive, given the mods, it seems a bit on the low side. Did you tune it with a large margin for safety? Well, you know what? I actually agree. And because of the amount of fuel it's using, so the duty cycle on the injectors that I know the size of, I agree and was sort of surprised and thought that the number was a little bit on the low side. While I was away having my eye adventure and Richard was sort of wheeling and dealing in order to take my car off to drag challenge, he fitted the built gearbox. And this is where all the magic happened, because the factory box was obviously not quite too happy with making its, say, 500-ish kilowatts at the wheels. So we definitely had a bit of slip going on through the factory transmission, which it's fair enough. My bodgy Chino tyres on the roller dyno is also something we need to take into consideration. So because of those two things, I definitely agree with you that the number seemed a tad lower than what I would have expected. Once we bolted in the Monster Torque gearbox, the thing that has, basically it's got all the treated shafts and it's got the billet input shaft, so that's all cool, but it's got all the clutches in it as well. So just like a manual transmission car, if you put a huge amount of horsepower in it, the dry clutch will slip. In an automatic transmission, it's just got a whole bunch of clutches in there, as clutches and magic in an automatic transmission. Once you go past what those clutches and magic can actually handle, the thing slips just like a manual trans. Richo putting the built Monster Torque ZF in it, I'm pretty sure that's where it unleashed a few more of the ponies, as well as my bodgy Chinese tyres that I had on the dyno. Between those two things, that's where the numbers changed a little bit. The guys took it on that exact tune-up, straight to drag challenge. Mitch did muck around with the torque management stuff for the 60 foot, so just keep that in mind. So the 60 went from a 2.2 to a 1.7, but off the trailer, first pass, 135 mile an hour. So if you use one of the old school sort of slide rules to figure out a rough power figure for that, I've got some numbers here. So it weighs 1,950 kilograms or 4,300 pounds. It went 135 mile an hour in the quarter mile. So an old slide rule shows 826 horsepower at the wheels. I had to punch the numbers in a few times. I had to do the kilo to pounds conversion a few times, but Australian. It kept coming back at a bit over 800 horsepower at the wheels, which makes me it's exciting and it's surprising. That's what it shows, and I tend to agree. So the car's not back here just as a show pony. I'm putting it back on the dyno now to run it up after the built transmission's in it and see what power it's got now. Hopefully it's got the same compression as when bloody Richo took it, and I'm expecting the thing is going to show the numbers that we want to see right now.
This car makes 496 kilowatts or 665 horsepower at the wheels. That's what it's making. So there we have it, the final dyno run with the built ZF. Now, if you can see the dyno sheet from there, a little bit of interesting information. Over and over and over again, it's making 496 kilowatts at the wheels, 665 horsepower. There's no slip in the transmission, there's no slip in the tyre. That is what this engine is making. That's all there is to it. Now, I know that our slide rule sort of scaling said that the thing's making about 800, 820 horsepower at the wheels. Well, this car, hand on my heart, is making 665 horsepower at the wheels. So a lower number than what the slide rule would lead us to believe, but the tarmac doesn't lie. 135 mile an hour, 1950 kilograms. So there's one thing that's not taken into consideration there, and that's what we call the area under the curve. This big 4-litre engine is making so much power for so long, it's making over 400 kilowatts for half of the rev range. So when you have a bit of a think about that, this thing is making bulk power through a huge amount of the rev range. So even though we say, yeah, it's making 496 kilowatts, it's very different. If this was a peaky style engine that was making 496 kilowatts across, say, 1,000 RPM, that's very different to 490 kilowatts across 4,000 RPM. So have a bit of a think about that. I suspect that's the reason why the thing runs 135 mile an hour, but is down in horsepower according to the slide rule. Well, that's it, guys. We've come to the end of the Falcon Barra build series. Firstly, I really want to thank all of our mates, our suppliers, for coming on board with this, offering us a huge amount of information, parts, Benny with so much labour, all of the stuff to make this happen. It doesn't happen overnight. We haven't put huge amounts of time and resources into this. This really has been a build just like any other car build. I really want to thank you guys for coming on board with this and helping with all of the comments, pushing us in the right directions to get the most out of this car. I really appreciate it. All the comments have been super supportive. I really have to thank Richo for always being there to get the pizza for us, to tell all the hilarious jokes, to organise picking things up and drop things off, and just being around to help us to get things done. Mate, fantastic. So like we say at the end of every video, thanks so much for watching. My name's Scott. Richard's normally standing over there, but this week he's off at PRI. So we both hope to catch you on the next adventure. We're just going to cut it here.
I don't think we even needed to cut it. I think he just found the saw and wanted to use it. He's wiring off the ZF. You there?
We don't run out of rods through the block. This is making
Phone up there. Siri, hey, you Siri. Where's Siri talking to you?
Yeah, gay time by itself.
I got hand pineapple.
Oh, it's been a long day, mate. Hand pineapple.
So as you can see, this is just my daily driver. Nothing really to see here.